and calling American Express. I'm like, I'm going to need to raise my limit. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, I'm trying to have a baby and I'd like to at least get points. So when this goes south, I can go to Italy for a trip. Like,
exactly.
That's my first question is like, do you take credit card? Because
literally.
I need the points.
Your husband's going to love that.
If I turn 40 before this baby comes home, you're going to hear the scream from New York City. Get me this baby. Get me this baby.
So today we are talking to a very special guest. So I've been introduced to Becky Fawcett recently from Help Us Adopt, and she is basically a fountain of knowledge when it comes to private adoption. She's gone through the process herself, and I don't know, just our first conversation together, I learned a lot in like 10 minutes, and I'm like, okay, yes, you're coming on the podcast. Please give us
stop talking right now because I need to ask all these questions again.
But this is something that we've talked about a lot recently because we've been considering adoption.
It's always been on our mind.
It has been, but more and more so as we get farther down the surrogacy road, we're like, whoa, should we have looked at private adoption first or more seriously?
Or also like, oh, wow, there's maybe a lot of things we didn't know or a lot of questions we didn't know to ask. And so if we eventually want to go down the adoption road, let's get super duper informed. Even not saying we weren't informed well,
right?
But let's get extra informed so that we, well, I mean, who can say if there's going to be hiccups, but that we know all the twists can prepare for.
I don't know how y'all feel that are listening to this right now, but going through just these previous episodes that we've done, learning more and more about these different systems, I just feel more equipped and more empowered to make these decisions. And I think that's what's led us to here of like, okay, let's talk to Becky. I actually want to know how we can adopt and figure it out and see like if that's going to be the best path for us going forward, or if we're going to continue with surrogacy or which one we're going to do first.
And shine a spotlight on Help Us Adopt and how that is potentially an avenue for other people looking.
So without further ado, welcome back to another episode of Who's Your Daddy podcast, where we work to demystify the process of starting a family through non-traditional means.
From foster to adoption to IVF and surrogacy, come along as we navigate this tricky space on our own journey to fatherhood. We are your hosts and husbands, Michael and Matt, and today we are going to talk to
Becky Fawcett
Yay!
From Help Us Adopt.
You guys are the best. I mean, way to make a girl feel welcome. Seriously.
Aww,
I'm going to have to like set you to my alarm clock every morning. One thing you already said that I just want to address is I think you said the hiccups, and I think when people realize, I get it that you guys knew you weren't going to have a baby the old-fashioned way. I understand how that works. But I think whoever is listening, I think when you leave what we all expect growing up is how you're going to have a baby. And then people are like, you think there's no hiccups anywhere. And what I want to tell anybody who's listening is having a baby is risky business, period. It doesn't matter if you're a heterosexual couple and you have sex once and you get pregnant. That is 9 months plus 21, 25 years of risk. Like, this is not easy. And I think that there's so much talk out there of when you go into assisted reproduction or adoption or however you're having a baby, that you have some control over the situation. And I just want to say, without being negative, you have no control over anything.
Exactly.
This actually trains you to become a parent. I now have 2 teenagers and I have control over nothing. I don't tell them that, but truly, like, I have control over absolutely.
I'm already sweating because
yeah.
As soon as we start these episodes and we have these conversations, I realize again, yes, I don't have control over anything. But then again, I am a control freak. I am a perfectionist.
Both of us.
It is in my blood.
You have to check that at the door. I mean, I am total type A, controlling, domineering, whatever. You have to check it all at the door. Again, no matter how you become a parent, because just when even with a baby, like just when you think you're like, oh, I've got them on a sleep pattern and I've got them eating the right food. Well, the minute you're a fool enough to say that out loud, About face, switch.
Yep.
They're off the sleep pattern. They won't eat the food that you thought. So
They start teething. Everything changes. They get grumpy.
Oh my God.
it's just one of those things that like there are hiccups. So without being negative, without being a pessimist, brace yourself.
Yeah.
Brace yourself. It's a wonderful road. I became a mother twice through adoption. One was semi-easy. The other one was not so easy. And my kids are amazing every day. Like I wrote them a little note. I leave notes for them all the time on the kitchen cabinet. It started during lockdown when we had nothing else to do. And I would leave them funny messages. But on Mother's Day, I wrote them a note and I just said, "Dear Jane and Brooke, I'm so grateful for whatever miracle brought you into my life." Period. Because even though they are teenagers and do their own thing and yell at me and don't clean up and whatever, they are these true miracles. Like they are just, and people say, well, don't you want to have your own kids? And I'm like, people always say that about adoption.
No.
And they are my own kids. Like that I think is the biggest problem with adoption is I think that people really are like, can I parent someone else's child? And
like, yes.
it's a little different than that, right? Like you're parenting a child that did not come from your biology.
Right.
But you are that child's parent through adoption, and they are your child through adoption. And the weirdest thing about this, and I always, I'm not really a religious person. Let's check religion at the door, but
along with expectations and control and perfectionism.
Yeah, we have a long list of crap we got to check at the door. But I believe in something because these children, I have to pinch myself that they didn't come out of my body.
Yeah, you forget about it. Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And I don't forget about it in a disrespectful way to adoption, to their birth parents. I forget about it. And then I'm like, at a doctor's office and they're like, can you fill out the family history? I'm like, sure. Then halfway through the family history, I'm like, oh my God. It's a little embarrassing.
This isn't there.
There is no family history.
Oh, wow.
I do think there's a cognitive gap there in like the general public's knowledge about adoption in the sense, like, because when I've thought about it, that is kind of a mental hurdle to get over is, this isn't a biological child of yours that you've brought into the world. How do you, and I want to address this maybe a little bit later because I do want to hear about you and introduce you and hear where you're from. But like, how do you get past that mental gap of like, this is my child? There's a difference between
I think society really did us a number here. Like the past generations really screwed you over here. They set up this expectation that adoption was weird, that adoption was shameful, that adoption was full of secrecy, that adoption was the kids that no one wanted because there was something wrong with them. And that is sort of the picture that society set up for the world. And so because of all that, people kept past generations' adoption a secret. And I sort of woke up, I adopted my daughter she'll be 18 in October. So I started this process almost 19 years ago. And I sort of had this moment in my head where I was like, why does no one want to talk to me about this? Like, I'm the only person I know who IVF didn't work for. No one wants to talk to me about adoption. And this is how I'm going to build my family. So I decided to become this loudmouth blonde who all she started talking about was infertility, miscarriages, failed IVF, $82,000 in IVF bills, adoption, birth parents, open adoption, adoptions that get, and I just decided that like, these are human beings I'm adopting.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
They're going to be my children. These are not, these are not unwanted children. These are children that are born into, at least in my situation, they're born into a situation that is beyond their control. Right. And in my kids' situation, the birth mothers and birth fathers, they knew that they couldn't give this child what they wanted to. And talk about making a mature, Jesus, what a decision to make.
Exactly.
Your world's spiraling, but you make this amazing decision for the well-being of this baby, to say, I can't give you what you really deserve. And I found a family that can give it to you.
I think you brought up an important point of like just being cognizant of the fact that approaching adoption now, we have that old perspective still affecting us of, adoption is shameful.
It's
Adoption is a secret, something to hide, something to not talk about, something in the shadows. So I completely forgot about that notion until you brought it up. And then I was like, oh my God, yeah. And so the thought that even us considering or thinking about adoption, just being mindful that the remnants of whatever those beliefs were in the 80s, the 90s, before then, like some of that could still be around in our brains.
It's fair and it's scary. And that's why I do these podcasts and I try to talk about this as much as I can on my platforms too, is like, I didn't want to adopt.
Right.
And my kids know that. Okay. So like, there's no secrets. My children know that I didn't want to adopt. And my oldest daughter, Jane, when she was like 6 or 7 years old, she heard me say that in an interview and she goes, joke's on you. Look at how that turned out. Like, I mean, but, and I'm like, it's not that I didn't want to adopt because of you. It's because society scared the crap out of me. Society told me this couldn't work. Society told me you would hate me. Society told me the birth mother would come after me. Society told me we wouldn't be able to like bond.
Mm-hmm.
None of that's true.
Yeah.
None of that is true.
Well, and the other thing I thought that you brought up that's important is that this is a mature decision on the behalf of the parents. It's not all parents giving kids up for adoption are irresponsible, did something like wrong. It was just like, look, a lot of people have unexpected pregnancies and they're in a situation where they're able to care for that child and they're surprised. That's happened in both of our families where they're like, oh crap, I was not planning on this, but I'm set up for it, right? So that could happen to anybody, and not everybody is in a economic space or a time in their life where that's an appropriate age or space to maybe bring a child into it. And it's a really hard decision.
Yeah, and some birth parents who place, they already have 2 or 3 kids.
So, yep.
So it's the issue of another, and again, I always tell people, I did a post on Mother's Day and I did a story on my Instagram. And I was like, people judge birth parents so unfairly because if someone were to take the 3 of us, and granted, I am probably old enough to be your mothers if I could have children, but and said to us, we're going to go back in your life when you were 15 to 25, and we're going to look at every bad decision you made.
Yeah, seriously.
Every bad decision you made, and we're going to look at every mistake you made, and we're going to publicly ridicule you and rake you over the coals and judge you for growing up.
Literally.
And how unfair would that be to you? Like, awful.
Oh, totally.
And that's what people do to birth mothers. And I'm like, we're not here to judge these women. We're here to support these women and help these women, because I always say about my kids' birth mothers, they needed me and I needed them.
Seriously.
And this is a partnership full of love and no judgment. No judgment,
Yeah. Can we start with just a little bit of like your history?
Who is Becky?
Yeah, who is Becky?
Where are you based?
Yeah.
What's
all
your
the
story?
Who is Becky?
Who is
Becky?
Oh my God. So Becky Fawcett is the oldest of 5 children, which is important only because becoming a parent was never a question of if for me. I always knew I was going to be a mom, always. But because I was the oldest of 5, I also knew I did not want to have a baby right when I got married at 26 years old, which can you believe I got married at 26 years old? I mean, talk about being a baby. But like, I knew what came with it because I felt like my sister is 20 years younger than me. And then there's 3 boys in the middle. Wow. So like, I really felt like I'd already raised some kids and I knew what was involved. So I was from Philadelphia. We lived outside of Philadelphia in Villanova, right by Villanova University. And, it's called Mainline is the area. And it's, I sort of call it land of the perfect. A lot of people there look like me and you don't talk about your problems. And if you have a problem, you close the doors and you go fix it and you come back out and you're like, see, nothing happened.
Oh, like Desperate Housewives Suburbia.
A little bit. And
Lane.
And so the problem with infertility and miscarriage is you can't fix it. And so everybody starts to know, and you can't hide behind a door and then be like, I'm here. And then when you say you're going to adopt, everybody knows because you're doing something different. At least back
my
then,
gosh.
it was completely different. And so at any rate, I was a publicist. I had my own PR firm. I was director of marketing in a magazine before I
Wow.
did that.
Can I just say goals? Hashtag
Oh,
goals.
yeah.
I've had a pretty great career. I will say that.
Yeah,
been
that
pretty
sounds
good.
great. I'm like,
It's been pretty good. It's been pretty good. And then, I ended up, long story short, shutting down my PR firm, although once in a blue moon, I take on a project if it's interesting enough. And I run helpusadopt.org right now. So like for the last 16 years, like it's my job. I don't think I'll ever do anything else. It's what I love. It's what I'm good at. Honestly, I always say like I hit rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I hit rock bottom trying to have kids. It was bad. I was depressed. I was running out of money. I was emotionally done. I was in so much pain from all the shots and all the procedures and all the whatevers. We did IVF 5 times and we got pregnant 3 times and had 3 miscarriages, one at 16 weeks, 12 weeks, and 10 weeks.
Holy crap.
And again, looking back now, I had to have those miscarriages because my timing had to be on board for Jane.
Mm-hmm.
So had I not had 3 miscarriages at the time I had them, this amazing creature would not be my daughter. So there is some interesting pieces of it. But again, I'd like my $82,000 back. And I did not need to have 3 miscarriages. That is more than anybody needs to have.
Yeah. So how many years? I mean, like, were you attempting to get pregnant the old-fashioned way for like a few years, and then it wasn't working?
Started trying to get pregnant at 31, and then Jane was born when I was 35. So it took me 4 years, which again, people are like, well, it's only 4 years.
4 years, but 5
long
IVF
time.
cycles.
Yeah. I mean, it's just awful. It's just awful. And then, then Brooke's adoption, then we waited a little bit before we adopted Brooke. And then Brooke's adoption took 2.5 years, which was ridiculous. So all in all, I kept telling the adoption agency with Brooke, I'm like, if I turn 40 before this baby comes home, you're going to hear the scream from New York City. Get me this baby, get me this baby, get me this baby. So Brooke was born when I was like 39 3/4. So it took 9 years basically to have 2 kids. And it cost between the IVF and 2 adoptions, it cost almost $200,000 in after-tax dollars. And I know you guys have a different story too, because surrogacy is a whole different financial ball of wax.
Right.
But remember, this was
20 years ago.
13 and
And
it was a long time ago.
Like you wouldn't expect, I don't know, private adoption to amount to that much. I know you did it twice, but then that's quite a bit of money.
Yeah, it's a lot. And the worst part about it is, look at our ages when we're trying to have kids. It would be one thing if someone was like, well, I was 65 and I spent $200,000 to do this. Well, okay, so maybe you have it at 65.
Right.
But in your 30s or late 20s, you don't have this money. If you have this money, you're supposed to put it into a home.
You're supposed to be saving for retirement, not trying to spend every last penny,
all of your savings. And I mean, I'm 31 now, so I'm kind of like starting at a similar age that you were, in the sense of attempting to start a family and have kids. So I very much relate to the fact that, like, at this point in time, no, we're not made of money. And holy,
and even if you are, expensive. At what point could you really afford all this?
Right.
Even at $500,000 a year, can you really afford all this? I don't know. At what point can you just write the check and be like, I didn't even feel that? I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of money. I don't know a lot of people who would be like, I could write a check for $50,000 and not care about it. Not many people would ever say that. That's a lot of money.
My brain feels like it's hemorrhaging when I think about writing a check for $50,000.
Oh my God. I had like heart palpitations putting those charges. So
stressful.
And calling American Express. I'm like, I'm going to need to raise my limit. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, I'm trying to have a baby. And I'd like to at least get points. So when this goes south, I can go to Italy for a trip. Like,
Exactly.
That's my
I
first
mean-
question is like, do you take credit card? Because
Literally.
I need the points
Yeah.
so that I can get a plane ticket somewhere after this because I am stressed. Whether it's
Absolutely.
adoption or surrogacy or IVF or whatever, use your credit card,
Right.
save up those points. But if there is a surcharge, because a lot of companies do a
Yes,
surcharge
that's
for
the
credit
thing I
cards,
was
don't
gonna
use
say.
a credit card. It's not worth it.
do not pay 3% to get
Oh my
crappy
God, no.
airline points. That's not smart.
So what options, like what resources did you have when you finally like made the decision to pursue adoption?
There were none. There were
So
none.
how did you like, what did
so
you do? Was there a Google at that
we-
point? What year is this? Like,
I first tried to find people who would talk about adopting and no one would. So that sucked. And then I went to my dad, whose best friend from growing up is a lawyer. He's not an adoption attorney, but I was like, Dad, can you ask Albert if he knows any adoption attorneys? And Albert actually did know an adoption attorney. And we met with him, this guy, and we loved him. So that became very easy. Now, in today's day and age, it's a little easier to find this stuff. But back in 2004, no one wanted to talk about this. It was so rude. It's just so rude because, you know, I still say it today. I'm a little at war with the IVF world. And if I had more time, I'd be a lot at war with the IVF world. And the reason I'm at war is not that I don't believe in it, not that I don't think people should do IVF. You follow your heart and your head until you need to have another. This is it. There's no judgment. You become a parent the way you want to. But 50% of the people pursuing IVF every year will not be successful. So if there's 8 million people a year,
50% of the people pursuing IVF will not be successful.
If you go to the best doctor out there with the best lab, with the best everything, their success rate is 50%. Those are facts.
yeah.
Those are facts. Those are lab facts, live birth. So my doctor claims that he was successful because he got me pregnant 3 times. I think he's full of shit to say that. I think that takes some nerve to tell me you did your job. That's nice. It's not very sympathetic. And that's my beef with the IVF world is like for the people you can't help or who run out of money or who don't believe in all the drugs, which is a fair statement. Let's be honest. You put a lot of hormones into your body and other drugs. Be kind. Be kind.
Yeah.
Point them in the right direction. I recently talked to one woman whose IVF doctor said, if you think adopting is anything like having a biological child, boy, are you wrong. Walked out of the room.
You're
How
kidding.
how rude
Oh
is
my
that?
God.
That is not supportive of family building. And my platform is let's build families.
What? That
If
is
you need
so
me
rude.
to walk you through, if you were to call me and be like, we're really at the end of our rope with surrogacy, I could actually have a very, good conversation with you about, let's talk it through.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Let's be objective. Let's see if you're real. And I'm not a therapist. I haven't been through surrogacy, but I sort of know innately the questions to ask to be like, are you at the end of your rope? And if you are, what are your options? And maybe you decide we're going to be a childless family. Well, that's okay. Some people do.
Yeah.
And let's support them. Let's support them for being that brave and bold to say that. That's my beef, is that you can't just be after people to spend money with you on these procedures and not say to them at some point, this doesn't look good. I know this woman, she can help you. She can walk you through how to adopt. Here's her website. Like, let's educate people on this doesn't have to be so scary and you don't have to be alone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that is like a microcosm of like, I think the issue that we've seen being in healthcare, it's like what you spend at most places is what that person is going to make. And we want
that's
people to be as fastidious and conscious of what people are spending and whether or not that's going to truly benefit them in like further their health. It's just tricky.
I'm being factual. It's for the 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's be totally honest. Like, there are people out there who I'm sure would love to do surrogacy. There's no way they could ever possibly afford it. So why
No.
would we make them feel badly about it, right? Like, or maybe they can't afford 5 or 7 IVF cycles.
Yeah.
Why would we make them feel badly for that? Why wouldn't we say, guess what? There are a lot of people in your boat. And they are living very happy lives as parents. One of the ways you can do it is adoption. And let's talk about all of these options. And let's let these smart people say, well, that sounds interesting. And I could afford $40,000 or $50,000. I can't afford 150 or 200, but I could afford 40 or 50. And this lady's making it sound not perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect, but less scary.
A couple things there. One of them, like the barriers that you have to get over in order to get to the point of adopting. One of those is the stigma that we talked about, that kind of like mental block. And you were just talking about it just now with how there's maybe a sense of judgment and doubt placed on adoption of like, oh, well, that's not as good as having your own kid.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. So that viewpoint in general is a barrier to get over for
it's
many
a huge
people
barrier.
with adoption. And then secondly, there's not a lot of information out there. From what you were talking about, it was very difficult for you to figure out what your steps were or what to do when you were looking at going from the IVF route to adoption. And that is a problem. And I think it's still a problem because it's not that there's not information out there on Google if you research and you really dig in, but just throughout the general public, talking to other people who have experience in adoption, or like finding people who have experience in adoption.
The other thing that scares people, in addition to this stigma, is the fact that they're like, okay, ready? This is what people say. Ready? Are you sitting down? I see you're sitting down, but are you really
very comfortable
down?
couch, puppy right next to me, so I'm okay.
You don't know what you're going to get. And what the bottom line here is two things.
I've heard that before.
Having a baby through surrogacy is not playing God either. There are risks involved there. You don't know what you're going to get. Now, can you guarantee through surrogacy that your surrogate is not going to do anything? She's going to eat well. She's going to go to the doctor. She's not going to smoke pot during her thing. She's not going to smoke cigarettes. Yes. Can you control those factors? Yes. But you cannot control genetics. Like you can't. Things could happen.
Right.
I've had friends where it hasn't been a perfect surrogacy run and they were shocked, not expecting it. And again, having a baby, no matter how you do it, is risky business. So that said, the second thing is, in adoption, you make some decisions as adoptive parents. You can say like, I can't go head on into severe special needs, known medical issues, whatever your thing is. And there's nothing to feel badly about. These are choices in adoption that you do get to make that you can't handle necessarily. Some people, like I didn't adopt out of my race. I adopted 2 Caucasian children. I get a lot of grief for that, believe it or not. It's ridiculous, the grief, but
it's just
who
like
cares?
being a gatekeeper for yourself, being able to say, this is what I can handle, this is what I can do, and being honest.
Other people go head on into, they're like, I want to adopt outside of my race. I want to adopt special needs. I want to adopt a kid with a severe medical issue because I want to do that. I'm equipped to handle that. I can take care of that. And so I like to tell people, like, parenting is a lot of ups and downs, but in adoption, it's supposed to be a blessing, not a burden. So that was told to me. That phrase was told to me in the beginning. And
it's like personal responsibility, just taking ownership of what you can and can't handle. And that's part of it, And
being honest with yourself.
Yeah. Being honest with yourself, knowing that you have those options and choices when you move forward in adoption and being able to.
And I think that's what also scares people is they're like, someone's going to give me a baby with a congenital heart failure. Like, no. Unless you go into it saying, I want to adopt a child with a heart problem, because believe me, there are children with heart problems. There are babies with heart problems. That's not the road you're going to take because you get the choice, And so.
Yeah. So how did you feel received when you started talking to Did you use an agency? Is that kind of how the
So I've
adoption
used
process went?
both. We used a private lawyer when we adopted Jane. We lived in Pennsylvania. And then when we moved to New York, adoption is state by state law, which is confusing. It's not federal law. And so in New York, we used a large agency outside of this state. And so I've done it both ways. And
how did that private lawyer find set of parents that were placing their child for adoption? How does that work?
So way back then, it's a little different now because of the internet. But way back then, they worked with a social worker. Lawyers cannot identify birth mother. So they have to work with either social workers, or now you see a lot of people self-identifying birth matches on the internet, which is tricky. Yeah. It's very tricky because of fraud. And again, if you're self-matching, are you trained to do this? I'm very hesitant about this whole self-matching. I'm not a huge fan because I think people go into it with no training whatsoever. And this is a big deal, screening birth mothers and asking them the right questions and knowing what to say. And, have to, it's really tricky for many reasons, but I don't want to jump too far off from one thing. So anyway, back when I was adopting, they would advertise and place ads in papers, and people
birth parents,
they put in their expenses paid, which is a terrible thing, but it's true. Birth mothers don't realize that they have options to be taken care of. And that's another thing too, is that if these women were educated sometimes as to what adoption truly is, that it's open, that you will be taken care of once you have a match for a certain period of time. It's all got legal boundaries on it. But a lot of these women are struggling, or they're homeless, or they can't put food on the table. And they think that they're all alone in making this decision. And what do? And I think a lot of the time is that no one takes the time to they're human. They're human. They may be dealing with this unplanned experience. And as I always say, they may be living a life that you don't think is okay. It's not your place to say that, but you might not think it's okay. They are human beings growing another human being in them. Let's treat them with the respect and care that they deserve.
Yeah.
It's a really...
So is there a thought process or a stigma that oh my gosh, I don't know if I could put my kid up for adoption because that would cost me money? I guess I didn't even think about that.
I think some people I think birth fathers especially think that if they sign again, these are some, not all. All my opinions are some, not all. But in the past, birth fathers have been hesitant to come forward because they think they're going to be held responsible in some way. But that's not what adoption is. That's not what it is. It's the transferal of parental rights.
Sure.
So, but it's better to have everybody involved, not only for their safety, they have their own lawyer, we have our own lawyer, but it's really great for the child as the child grows up. And it's great for the birth parents. My children's birth parents get to watch their children grow up. I always call them our children. Yeah. It's not co-parenting, but I use the term our children. Right. Even with my younger daughter, her grandparents, I've seen them a couple times now. Grandmother came to me. She goes, for years, I just wondered if she was safe.
That's incredible.
And I'm I'm so sorry it took us so long to find you, but I wanted her to make the decision that she wanted to meet you. It wasn't my decision to meet you. It was hers. But that killed me. I was why didn't anybody tell you she was safe? Right?
I know. That's kind of bizarre.
It's a system. And that's why we as adoptive parents and concerned individuals, we have to make an effort to change this system. We have to make an effort to have a loud voice. One of the things that I have done, we were joking at the beginning that if you were calling and being Becky, I'm going to adopt, that's how this conversation would go. So I had a lot of those phone calls for a long time, and they were very time consuming, and it got to be too much for me to handle on an ongoing basis. So what I did on our website, on the homepage at the top, there's a big button that says adoption ? Where do I start? And if you click there, there's 6 questions and some details about each question. And that is the phone conversation. Like, I really had the phone conversation with myself and wrote it down. And there it is and that's where I direct people. I'm like, go read that.
Yeah.
Think about it, and then we can talk.
What is Help Us Adopt? And what brought you into creating it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
What inspired you to do that?
First of all, Help Us Adopt for real, our mission statement, is an adoption grant program that helps couples and individuals with the financial cost of adoption. We give grants up to $20,000. But the caveat, and Help Us Adopt has become a national community of adoptive families, a community of people who are looking to adopt. And we've become a resource for people who are looking to adopt and a shoulder to lean on. But the main thing that we do is we're a grant organization. But everyone wants to know, like, why on earth did you stop having a successful public relations career and close down your business and do this? Like, did you always dream of doing a nonprofit? Like, what on earth happened? And the answer is, this was never on my radar screen. But
You're like, I didn't want to adopt. I didn't want to start a nonprofit.
No,
but here I
didn't
am.
want to adopt. I didn't want to do any of this. And here I am loving it and thinking I'm never not doing anything.
Life has a way
of showing you what you really should be doing. So when we started to run out of money and we went into adoption, we had $40,000 left in our savings. That was it. And that was what Jane's adoption cost. And I had a moment where I was very aware that while I didn't want to write the check, I could.
Yeah.
And I was very grateful for that moment. And then I started asking the question, like, okay, so what do people in my shoes do if they don't have this? What happens? And the answers were really bad. I mean, I don't want to waste a lot of time on it. It was basically like you made every bad financial decision ever in your life and really set yourself up for financial destruction to have one child. Or you lived a childless life, not by choice. And that is a big distinction. I have complete respect for people who choose to live a childless life. And I think that is a tremendous decision in our society because our society doesn't like that decision. Our society thinks everybody has to have children. But if you get the choice taken away from you because of money, that is where I started to sort of dig because I was like, well, that's not right. That's not fair.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
too many children. There's too many children that need homes. So what are we doing here?
There's actually like 400,000 something, 400,000.
That's just in foster care.
That's just in foster, yeah.
There's actually like tens of millions of children around the globe who are homeless, period. And living on the streets and living in orphanages. And I mean, the problem unfortunately will never be solved, but the problem, we can make a difference.
It should be, it can definitely make it better. Like there's so many avenues to make this thing so much better and more efficient.
There's a lot of people who want to have kids, and there are a lot of kids who want to have families. So how do we make that?
And money is standing in the way. So as a publicist, I looked for an adoption grant program 18, 19 years ago. Because I was going to take them on as a pro bono client. And unfortunately, this is where this conversation gets really good.
I'm getting my coffee ready.
Get your coffee ready. This might be like champagne and margaritas. Like this is where this call gets really good. Yeah. I should have had a glass of something bubbly next to me. But this is where this gets really good. And this is where, unfortunately, like for real, this is where I came to life as a human being at age 36. The adoption grant programs that were out there when I started doing research 18 and 19 years ago believed that a family was a white woman married to a white God worshiping a very Christian, a white woman married to a white man worship. I know, sorry.
A white
it's
God.
Friday afternoon.
I got you.
Exhausted.
Your husband's going to love that.
I know.
A white God,
woman married to a white man worshiping a very Christian God. And they would specify how you were going to adopt. You were going to adopt by their terms. And then they might give you $2,000 to help with this problem of $50,000. And it was just, okay. So
So it was like, here's some pennies for being a very specific demographic.
They make you adopt by their terms?
Oh, yeah. Like they would say, we will only help you if you adopt a special needs girl from China. Well, what if you don't want to adopt a special needs girl from China? What if you wanted to, back then Ethiopia was open. What if Ethiopia was your heart was set on? Or what if you wanted a domestic newborn baby? So, but that was actually not my initial issue. My initial issue was, this is how we're defining family? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Like,
what the heck?
Are you kidding? So first of all these organizations, at least they would say, we don't support a single parent household, but they wouldn't even talk about the LGBT community and people of color. They wouldn't even have those words on their website. It was as if they had erased these communities from their mindset of who.
Wow.
I mean, I was appalled. And everybody's like, well, you're a white woman and married to a white man. Why do you even care? And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding? Just because the rules don't apply to me doesn't make them right. This is horrific. This is horrific. And I know what I look like, but I don't think I'm the definition of a family. Are you kidding me? I'm a family. I was so upset by how discriminatory these adoption grant programs were, and they're legally allowed to. It's like an insurance company. Like an insurance company can deny coverage to anybody they want to. And these grant organizations,
that there's like discrimination almost like written into law of like, oh yeah, you're a private company, okay, do whatever you want.
It's
like,
terrible.
You can discriminate. I just
so
don't
weird.
understand. It makes me so mad.
I knew that family equality was a big deal 18 years ago. So I sat down and wrote the mission statement for Help Us Adopt, that we help everybody. I mean, it's a little longer than that. It doesn't say we help everybody, but our main platform is family equality, focusing on, obviously, we help Caucasian heterosexual couples. No one has to write me an email and complain about that. We help everybody. But every day I get up waving a huge stick and screaming for people of color, the LGBT community, and single parents. And I am technically not a member of any of those communities. And that is becoming my life's work. A $20,000 grant is a lot of money. A $5,000 grant is a lot of money. Like, this is a pure gift. This, I didn't want to create a loan. I wanted to be, you introduced me as the adoption fairy. Well, I am. I wish I had a wand.
I want to like clarify this. You give out grants. You give out money to people who want to adopt.
Yeah.
Like,
who are sitting at home going, how the hell am I coming up with another 15 or 20,000? I mean, listen, if someone called me today and said, Becky Fawcett, in your lovely life in New York City, you need to pay a bill of $15,000 or $20,000 in the next 3 weeks, or something doesn't happen. I'd probably have to dig into my retirement. I don't know what I would do.
I'd be like, well, I guess it's not happening.
How do you go? Like, you don't go out and earn $15,000 in 3 weeks. Like, you know, I mean, it's a very challenging thing, the cost of adoption. It really is. And if you know, the most of our country, the average household income is $54,000. An adoption costs more than their take-home pay. But somehow these miraculous families are getting like 3/4 of the way there.
Are there still a lot of companies out there working in adoption that basically either explicitly or implicitly deny access to their services to minorities, LGBTQ communities, and people they would determine as not fit to be parents based off of some other arbitrary factors about them?
There are agencies and lawyers who will not work with certain groups for that exact reason. Still, I mean, when I started Help Us Adopt, so that was back in 2007, I think there were 9 states where LGBT adoption was illegal. And now that has changed. So that's gone. That those laws have all been changed. But there are still adoption professionals that won't do it, or that don't believe in like single Black women becoming mothers through adoption, or don't believe in Muslims adopting.
That's so bizarre.
Is that mostly like religiously affiliated?
The agencies specifically, a lawyer can very easily say, I can't take you on. I'm full to capacity. Because a lawyer is like a single person. So it's a little more, if you've got someone who's being discriminatory, it's a little easier to hide that way. Because a lawyer can only work, one person can only work with so many families at one time. But an adoption agency is built to handle a lot of families at once. Their business model is different. And they all hide their hatred behind religion.
That's what I was
They'll
wondering.
take the money, but then they'll not.
Some of them won't even take the money. Some of them will say flat out, we won't help you.
And I've heard from
you
so many
cannot
people,
sign up with us.
People have gone through the foster system or a private adoption agency and have waited for years and years and years to adopt, and never, it hasn't come through. They haven't gotten anything. And I'm like,
no, it's terrible.
Well,
it's terrible. And then they're afraid to say anything because they're like, if I say anything, they'll blackball me. And I always tell people, like, and one of my friends who's one of the good guys, she's an adoption attorney here in New York City. She gets so mad at me when I say this. I'm like, adoption professionals work for us. And she's like, please stop saying that. I'm like, I'm so sorry, but it's true. We are writing you very big checks. We are the customer. You are the service provider. I go, that doesn't mean that as the customer, I can doubt your judgment. But if I call you, you have an obligation to call me back. And there are a lot of and I go, not you, to my friend, but there are a lot of adoption professionals who will take 3 weeks to call one of their clients back. And that's not okay.
No,
like, that's not okay. Or the social worker will just blow them off and not answer a question. Not okay. So I'm the loud voice of reason saying, you keep calling till you get an answer. And if they blackball you, now you have a lawsuit because that's illegal. Like, you can't blackball someone for asking questions about their adoption they're paying $50,000 for. Come on. I mean, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying that out loud, but it's true. It's like, you can't treat people like this.
Seriously.
And there can definitely be a little bit of a power struggle between dynamics of agency and customer.
And again, if a family's struggling, they really don't think they have the power to say, you must call me back. But guess what? They must call you back. You have to be a reasonable human being. Like, you can't be saying, are you cooking me dinner tonight? Why haven't you cooked me dinner tonight? But you can ask reasonable questions about your adoption. And if nothing's happening, which it did for me on the second adoption, nothing was happening for months. I needed to know why, so I didn't lose my mind.
And then you show up at their house and you demand an answer. No, I'm kidding.
And you demand dinner.
So I hate to say this, but I did tell my adoption agency, I'm the crazy woman. I said, if you do not call me back, this is the third or fourth phone call I've left you in 24 hours, I'm getting on a plane. And if you find me sitting in your office, you're going to be very, like, you're leaving me no choice.
This will not go well for you.
I wish I had the guts to do that.
Like, my second adoption cost $63,000. And there was a period where no one would call me back.
And you're like,
That's so
wait, what am I
rude.
paying for? Why? Like what?
Are you kidding? You have to call me back. You're the service provider.
Wait, can you maybe do like a very basic breakdown of like why adoption even costs that much money?
That's a
like,
good question.
I think
it's not a
we've been
great
talking
answer. So the number one thing is adoption professionals set the rate. Fact. So if there's any adoption professionals listening that don't like my answer, you guys set the rates and you guys have the ability to do this for less if you want to. Fact. But we're not asking anybody to work for free. We're asking people to be fair, right? The inherent problem with adoption is that there is no one, if we're talking about domestic adoption, the birth parent side, they're not paying their bills. They're going to hire a lawyer? Are you kidding? They're not hiring a lawyer.
No.
So adoptive parents have to pay for both sides. And that's where it gets expensive. I have to have a lawyer for myself or the agency. They need a lawyer. I need a social worker. They need a social worker. I have court papers. They have court papers. Once you're matched with a birth mother, you do, if they need support, whatever the state legal guidelines are, you have to pay that support. And then if they have insurance, you pay the deductible. If they don't have insurance, those are big medical bills.
you'd have to pay the medical bills. That kind of blows my mind a little bit to think about, like the medical bills lands on the adoptive parents.
Yes. And
If
the
they don't have
sad part
insurance?
is everybody wants to get paid. They don't care who it is. They're like, the attitude is, and again, if someone is listening who says, God, that's rude, the attitude out there is
Keep it real.
I'm doing quotes, someone is paying this bill. That is the
Yeah.
attitude out there. The attitude out there is not, oh my God, this precious child just came into the world and had nowhere to go. And
Right.
let's work
Welcome
this
to
out.
capitalism.
I'm just
That's
thinking
not
about
the
that.
attitude.
Like, hello,
Mm-mm.
like, what's the alternative if nobody's like? So that's the thing,
Yeah.
is that adoptive parents, whether or not they're going to be adopting this child, the baby is going to be born, and if at the hospital, like, that's just gonna happen. Sorry, I don't know if that bill's gonna get paid or not, but like, how is that the adoptive parent's responsibility?
And again, you're not going to provide medical treatment to that woman giving birth. Women die during childbirth. Are you kidding?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
of course you're providing care to that woman. You took
I
a
just think it's
medical
weird
oath.
that, like, if there wasn't an adoptive parent for this child, meaning no one's going to adopt this
Right.
child and they're just no parents, okay, that's fine. Nobody has to pay for the medical bill.
Right.
But
Right,
as soon as
exactly.
there's an adoptive
mean-
parent, they have to pay for the medical bill now.
I've seen cases where families could afford the adoption, so to speak, and then they were slammed with birthing bill of $40,000 or $50,000. And then they were like, how the
Whoa.
hell do we pay for that? We already paid for a $50,000 adoption. Now we have a hospital bill of $50,000. And again, that doesn't happen all the time, but
Right.
But it can happen.
it can happen. And then if you're adopting internationally, the orphanages stand in for birth parents. So there's a country fee and there's an orphanage fee and there's some shady other stuff that happens where
And
you're
I think
told to
we-
bring cash to the
We
country.
heard that
And
the countries that LGBTQ plus people can adopt from specifically at this time are only Colombia and South Africa.
yes,
abroad.
that is true. That is true.
Mhm.
And
Which
that's
is,
been true
yeah,
for
very
some
different.
time. It's very
Yeah.
different. Countries have, like China is closed now and will, in my
Mhm.
estimate, will never reopen. But China
Mhm.
had an obesity rule for adoptive parents and a
What?
a body.
Oh
What is
my
it? A BMI.
gosh.
They have a BMI
Yeah.
rule. I
No
mean,
way.
So arbitrary.
we're talking about a kid in an orphanage that needs to come home, and you're going to judge someone on the size of their body?
You're going to determine whether or not that child has parents based off of their weight.
Oh god.
So obviously there's huge
Yeah.
issues in the adoption system, and I very much appreciate you being here and explaining some of this because it's stuff that I wasn't aware of. Going
Yeah,
into
well, and
it.
it also sort of like sheds light on the, oh my gosh, you guys are going through surrogacy. Like, why don't you just adopt? And it's like,
Oh, that's a tough
like-
one too. Why don't you just
I mean,
adapt?
like, I understand where that might seem like the most obvious and simple choice, but it is not obvious and simple all the time.
It's not obvious and simple.
Another question I have is how do people separate the good eggs from the bad eggs when it comes to adoption agencies?
I know, because when you go on Google and you're just like adoption,
No,
and
you
there's, like,
can't.
So
No, no,
what
no,
would
no,
you
no, no,
recommend to
thousand.
people?
No, do not. Everybody listening, if you take one thing away from this very long podcast full of information, do not Google how to adopt. You will hide under your bed and hyperventilate and cry, and you'll be like, I can't do this.
Mhm.
There's a
Too late
lot
for
of
me.
negative voices in
Yeah.
adoption, and they're all keyboard cowboys, and they're all out there.
Mm.
And the good voices are not getting engaged in that, and the good voices are not as vocal as the bad voices. So that's the first thing. The other thing is this: you got to be aware of the wolf. I call them the wolves in sheep's clothing. There are really good people out there. We have an adoption professionals council on our website, which is in the link adoption. How do I get started? That I told you all about.
Mhm.
You know, and we can start there. And if like I've had LGBT people call me and be like, can you tell me 4 agencies that specialize in LGBT adoption? Yes. You know, the thing is, you have to do your homework. Okay. So you do need, just like you said, you're like, I don't know where to go to talk to someone who adopted. And usually I tell people, once you decide you at least want to even look at adoption, start talking about it, because I'm telling you guys, Michael and Matt, right now, You
Yeah.
absolutely know people who've adopted or who are adopted or who have already, you absolutely do.
True.
But you
True.
haven't
Yeah.
talked about it enough. So these people haven't come out of the
Right.
woodwork. And the
Yeah.
minute you start talking about it, you're going to be like, I cannot believe I've been friends with you for 10 years and you never told me you were adopted.
And I didn't know. Yeah.
I didn't know.
No,
Yeah.
I think when you mentioned that, I'm like,
So
yeah, there
that's the
probably
first
are
thing.
quite a few people, but haven't talked to them about it.
Do your homework. Like, call an agency or a lawyer and be like, do you work with gay men who are adopting? And when they take a pause, you say, thank you very much. Have a nice day. And then you keep going until someone's like, yeah, we have 5 couples in at the moment. Would you like to talk to them? Because
Yeah.
people, once you're in it, we want to talk to other people. So ask them for a referral, or ask Brian at Gays with Kids for a referral,
Yeah.
or come to Help Us Adopt and be like, do you have a gay family who's been through it that we could talk to, or whatever your case may be. But that is true. Like, you do, like, if you are whatever category of family and you call a Christian agency that specializes in white heterosexual couples, and that's not what your family looks like, that is not the agency for you. And
Right.
that, not that it's okay, but it's okay. Keep moving.
Right.
There
Do you know
there are adoption
how
professionals.
many agencies like there are even like
Oh,
in
well,
the US? I mean,
anybody can set up a shingle.
Right, exactly. That's the tricky
Shingle.
thing with that's a tricky thing with, I think, surrogacy agencies as well. Is like that there's
Yeah.
there can be
Yeah.
so many, and they
Well,
can be big ones,
anybody
small
with a
ones.
Here's the
laptop
deal.
And a website.
Here's the problem, and I'm glad you looped surrogacy into it because it's fair criticism of all of it. Same with
Yeah.
IVF. There's money to be made.
Exactly.
Oh my God, yeah.
I know.
There's
and
money to
that's-
be made. And these people, I loop myself in these people, are desperate to be parents. They'll do anything.
Do you know any states specifically? Like, there are some states that are like, in general, no matter who you are, no matter how you identify, they're just like not good for surrogacy. Are there certain states that are just like, these are just not they don't have great laws on the books for adoption, and so like maybe if you live in these states, like just be
New
aware
York.
of that. Well, so
New York is
literally
tricky.
New York
is
not,
really hard. You know, I wouldn't say there's any bad states to adopt, but where
Okay.
adoption is tricky, where adoption is, you just have to know the laws. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's the Quad A, it's the American Association of Adoption Attorneys. That's a good group. You can go on their website, you can search by state, and then within that, I mean, but that's an association. So
Okay.
their members police themselves, if that makes sense. So if there's a member who is not acting ethically, the other members will have them removed from the association. So like, that's a really
Okay.
good place to look. And you can look geographically. And I tell people, like, you know, you have to, people are like, well, I don't want to spend $600 for the 2-hour consultation fee. I'm like, well, you have to. And if you can't
Right.
spend $600 to learn about adoption with the right person, then you're really not going to like the bill of $50,000 that you get at the end of the day. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
no one can work for free anymore. And that is understandable.
Yeah.
It's understandable. And
Right.
most of these attorneys, if you book the 2-hour session for like $600 or whatever it is, if you hire them, they typically credit you.
One thing that came to mind just before we close out is that I often kind of mix the thoughts between the foster system and private adoption. I kind of like mix those worlds up in my mind. I was wondering if you are able to help differentiate those of what is the difference between private
Yeah.
adoption and like
And
foster
public.
care, foster to
And
adoption.
I think they sort of
Yeah.
have a little overlap once
but
you
I
actually start
would love
signing
to
the
hear just, like,
papers.
how to
Yes.
how to set
Yes.
that
I
up.
mean, in the end, you adopt a child, but in the foster to adopt, the foster system was designed and functions to remove children from a not safe or unstable environment and puts them in a foster situation that supposedly is safe
Mhm.
until the biological situation
Is
can
resolved.
take them back home, until they can be reunified with their biology.
Mhm.
The guidelines for that, again, I'm being factual. No one's going to like this one either. They're loose. They're loose. They're loose. You know, you have a lot of situations that make you uncomfortable because of behavior and criminal activity and drugs and things like that. But the kids go back because in the foster care, well, in the adoption in general, blood trumps adoption.
Right.
And I was told that many times going through the process. And so the problem with foster care is that the child can be removed from your home. That's a hard thing. Some people are wired for that. Some people are not, because the flip side is fostering is free and adopting through the foster care is free. And if you adopt, you end up getting a monthly stipend until your child is 18 or 21. The stipend is meant for the child, not for you. It's for the child.
It's to cover expenses that you incur because you're trying to feed and clothe a child.
Yes. And so, it's a really great thing. There are, as you said, over 400,000 children a year in the foster care system. I do not know. So here's where it gets tricky. People want babies.
Right.
That's
and a
not
lot of
really,
them are not.
It happens in the foster care system, but it's rare. And the children that are truly available and have been, the papers have already been signed from their biological parents and they're available for adoption are teenagers. And they're teenagers who have been through hell and back again. And not everybody is up for that. It's another reality of adoption.
So what would you say to prospective people who want to be parents and want to start a family and want to adopt, and they might be, having some questions about finances and how, how do they look into applying for a grant through Help Us Adopt?
What we've really tried to make Help Us Adopt be is a fully transparent, website-driven organization. So yes, we are here. If you have a question, there's an info email on our website, and you are all more than welcome to email there. You will get a human response. We're on social media. I'm on social media. You will get a human response if you message us there too. I always say, as long as it's kind. I don't answer don't answer angry emails. Everything's on our website. The application is online. It's free of charge. There's no secrecy here. We have an FAQ page. We have a guideline page. We have testimonials. We give grants up to $20,000. We have our deadlines out there. And again, if you look at that this year and you're like, oh my God, I can't make the last deadline. I'm not going to. We're here next year too. We're not going anywhere. This is an ongoing, I have built this thing. We're not going anywhere. But applying too early doesn't help you either. We're not startup money. You really need, and again, if you have a question of whether you should apply now or wait till the next grant cycle, email info@helpusadopt and say, this is where I am. I might be too early because, we don't have enough money to give away.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. We get $14 million of requests a year, and I have 1.2 to give away. And I'm not telling you that to be negative or to scare you off, because someone's walking away with that money. So it might as well be you. And we are always looking for strong LGBT applications. We don't get enough of them. I'm telling you that. Public, we don't. We get
shocking.
the most
this
applications.
Is a public request for LGBTQ plus people to put your application in to Help Us Adopt.
I've been asking for 16 years. I've been asking for 16 years. I'm like, where are all the gay people adopting?
Help Us Adopt.
They're
is
all independently wealthy.
Begging for people to sign up so that they can give money away.
Oh my God. Well, one statistic that I was reading was that of same-sex couples, it's something like 20-some% of female couples are raising kids. 8% of same-sex male couples are raising kids. So that's probably a lower number than obviously heterosexual couples.
Yeah.
When you take the percentage of it, right?
Well, right now we give really pretty consistently. We've given 18 to 19% of our money to the LGBT community.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are like, Becky,
That's
that's
huge.
so great. Well, I don't think it's great.
She's like, more.
I don't think it's great.
More.
I think it needs to be like 25, 30%.
Let's
But the
go.
only way I
Yeah.
can get that money, and my board believes that, and our donors believe that, like, this is what we do. And the LGBT community in the world of adoption grants is underserved, which means it's a highlight button for us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Period.
yeah.
And so, but again, I can only give the money away if we get the applications. Like, I can't just magically.
We will be just spreading the word.
I might be filling out an application. I mean, yeah.
This woman is begging to give you money at this point. That's amazing.
Well,
Oh my
I've
It's
learned
everybody.
so much from this conversation.
Yeah, there's like 18,000 things
Thank
that
you
I
for-
didn't know.
Thank you for opening my mind to
Oh my
private
God. And I've
adoption.
been so
Yes.
comfortable and outspoken. I'm sure to get hate mail from some of the things I've said.
You
But
know
it's
what?
all worth it.
That means
It's
you're
all
doing a
worth
good
it.
thing.
If you're not
you get
making
hate mail.
if
Yeah.
you're not making somebody upset, you're not doing it right, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
we love that.
really,
Well, thank you so much for coming on,
Yes.
Becky.
Oh my
and
gosh. I
being
can't wait
Oh
to
my
talk
gosh.
more in the future.
Yeah, seriously.
it was so
We'll be
great.
in touch.
We're all in this together because none of us are having babies the way we thought we would when we were kids. None of us
Yeah.
are. So that puts us all in the same boat. And I think the sooner we all realize that, like, it doesn't matter who you love. If you're in this, like, I'm going to have a baby a different way, we need to support each other.
Yeah.
You know, that's just it.
Okay, so what do you think?
Oh my gosh, well you heard it here. If you're a gay couple, go apply for a grant. Go
Yeah.
get some babies.
No, that's
kidding.
pretty incredible. I had a lot of questions answered and I'm processing. I think Michael, you and I both do want to adopt in the future. And
Mhm.
we're still trying to determine like what that timeline looks like and whether or not we're going to go to foster to adopt, private adoption, or
Yeah, I mean,
there's so many things to consider, finances
Each-
being one of them.
and that's why I think it's so nice to have somebody like Becky who was like, I see this is messed up, this is hard, I'm gonna try and do everything I can to
And
like
it's true. There's a lot of messed up stuff about it.
diminish the financial burden, because that's usually, I mean, unfortunately, it's probably the biggest hurdle, right? Because I
Yeah.
think that there are a lot of amazing people out there who are well-meaning, who could give of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but like, just because you're a wonderful person, you have a huge heart, and
Do you also have a huge paycheck?
yeah, it's just like, not those things don't always align. And I hate that like finances come into this so much. Similarly, like finances come into healthcare in
Yeah.
general, right?
There's
Like in
crossover here.
other countries, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you have to worry about healthcare costs, right? Like, you wouldn't have to worry about paying for your adopted child's birth at a hospital in most other like developed countries that have universal healthcare, because it's literally covered under the government. It doesn't matter. It's just like, we kind of get in our way something.
All things to consider as we sign off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thank you so much for listening to this podcast, for learning with us. We're just excited to be here and excited to be doing this with all of you.
Yeah, and I'm just hopeful that we can be a resource for people as we, get some FaceTime with people in different parts of this family building community.
And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, make sure to leave us a rating, leave us a review. It helps us immensely. It helps our podcast, or helps other people find our podcast. So
Yeah.
anyone else who is out there and needs information and wants to learn.
Absolutely. And I think that's all we have.
Yeah. Great.
So,
Well, we'll
again,
see you next time.
Thanks for listening. And as always,
Daddy's out.